I'm extremely happy and honored to introduce a great scholar and alumnus of the University of Peradeniya at this award ceremony, Vidyanidhi Professor S.A. Kulasooriya. Professor Kulasooriya has graduated from the University of Ceylon in 1966 and received the doctoral degree from the University of London in 1971. Subsequently, he was awarded Doctor of Science degree from the Samaragama University of Sri Lanka. He is a fellow of Institute of Biology and also the National Academy of Sciences and an emeritus professor. Professor Kulasooriya had been working as the head of the Department of Botany and former Dean of the Faculty of Sciences, University of Peradeniya, and he holds a position as a Professor of Microbiology since 1981. He has 50 years of experience in teaching, research and administration both in Sri Lanka and abroad. During his career, he had interacted with a number of national, foreign and international organizations to initiate, strengthen and establish collaborative programs with the department, faculty and also the National Institute of Fundamental Studies where he is currently working. Professor Kulasooriya's outstanding contribution to the development of Sri Lanka has been recognized in numerous occasions. If I quote a few of those, he was awarded titular National Award Vidyanidhi by the President of Sri Lanka in 1986. He was also awarded Presidential Research Award in 1999 and 2000. He has published 2 books, 92 research papers and 160 communications. He has research experience in many disciplines such as biodiversity and environment management, water pollution, cyanobacteria, biological nitrogen fixation, biofertilizer and soil fertility. He was a role model for the undergraduate in the field of botany and I was fortunate enough to be one of them, sir, at the Faculty of Science, University of Peradeniya. I have personally experienced his great ability of teaching and research. On behalf of the Department of Botany and Faculty of Natural Sciences, I would like to thank him for making this wonderful contribution, especially to the academia and to the society at large. Professor Kulasooriya, on behalf of the Open University of Sri Lanka, I wish you all success in your future endeavors. Thank you, and over to you to read your speech.
Good morning, everyone. Mr. Vice Chancellor, Professor Ayadure, the Dean of the Faculty of Natural Sciences, staff of the Open University of Sri Lanka, the awardees, ladies and gentlemen. I consider this as a special privilege that you have given me this opportunity to address this gathering on the day of your annual award ceremony. It's a pleasure for me to share a bit of my knowledge and experience with this gathering on a timely title, Ecosystem Diversity, Their Value and Exploitation. Actually, when I was invited by the President of the Botanical Society, Dr. Kulasooriya, he suggested that I talk to you, I give a talk on something to do with microbiology, because that is in fact my discipline of specialty, as well as I was the founder professor of microbiology in the Faculty of Science at Peradeniya. But I thought myself that it is too specialized and perhaps narrow for an audience of this nature. And I thought I'll take a challenge and start talking a little bit on a broader title which is of relevance to our lives today and particularly in the future. So therefore I chose this title, Ecosystem Diversity, Their Value, and I use the word intentionally, exploitation, and not utilization, because that is what is happening. Humans are not using natural resources, but exploiting them. An ecosystem, a simple definition, is a community of organisms living in conjunction with the non-living environment, closely interacting with one another. It is an important component of biodiversity, which has three components: species diversity, genetic diversity, and ecosystem diversity. The reason I thought I selected ecosystem is that if you protect the ecosystem, that is the easiest way to protect species diversity and genetic diversity. There are exceptions, but that is the most practical way. If you protect the habitats, species that are living in that habitat, together with the genetics, the genes that they contain, will be conserved. So when we talk of ecosystem protection, we cover the other two areas to a large extent. I will now go through a few pretty pictures to illustrate the fantastic ecosystem diversity this little island of 25,000 square kilometers has. We have such a beautiful ecosystem diversity. Being an island, we start with the littoral and the coastal ecosystems. In this picture, you see clearly the littoral system here, and that together with the few corals and so on, associated with marine algae or seaweeds as we call them. Here, if you look very carefully, you have the sea grasses here, the green algae, and mostly the brown and the reds. As you move in from the sea towards the beach, of course, we know predominantly we are having the dominant tree as the coconut tree with white sand beaches, quite beautiful. But on these sand beaches, not many plants can grow. Only certain plants which are adapted to that harsh environment of lack of fresh water as well as the salty breeze. The strand plants of Hypomia prescripti and Spinifex rotundus, those are the ones that can grow at the white beaches. Not many other plants can grow. Then we have the extreme ecosystems of sand dunes, salt marshes, and in these salt marshes only certain highly adapted xerophytic plants like Saliconia can grow. Then as we come in a little bit more, you see the thorny shrub vegetation and lagoons. In the thorny shrub vegetation, we are accustomed to seeing a fair number of cacti like these, like Opuntia, and this plant is something that we cannot miss along the shores, Gloriosa superba. The name, in fact, came when two naturalists, British naturalists, were walking along the beach. They saw this creeper in full bloom, and one said, "Look at that, glorious, isn't it?" Other one said, "Superb," and they named it Gloriosa superba. Then we have calotropis. Then we come to the lagoons, the mixture of seawater and fresh water, where some of the rivers are flowing out. And then you have these migratory birds, flamingos, making it so beautiful. Then, of course, also the carnivores, the crocodiles as well. As we move in, we see the mangrove vegetations also close to the shoreline. Most of you who are doing natural sciences or botany are accustomed to this. These are specially adapted with their profuse prop roots, which are propping up the plants and stabilizing in this loose substrate. The breathing roots, negatively geotropic pneumatophores, knee roots doing the same thing. Then viviparous germination, germinating on the mother plant itself so that it can drop into the harsh substrate and still grow. Then the economically important shrimps and crabs. Then we see the dry evergreen forest as we move in. Evergreen word means that they do not seasonally drop their leaves, but they are dry zone forests. And the other thing is that the top canopy is not continuous, it's kind of spread out. Then, of course, it's found with the typical fauna, wild buffaloes, our flagship fauna, elephant, deer, and the leopards. Some of the wild. Then those are the dry zone forests are the ones which have valuable timber. Of course, the wet zone and other forests have plenty of timber and trees, but these are the valuable ones. And among them, we have Veera, Kohomba, Asaradicta, then the extremely valuable ebony. Those trees grow mostly in the dry zone forests. Then we move on to the wet zone forests, it was exemplified by Singharaja, where the canopy is closed. The Tarzan can move from one tree to another. And there are tall trees. See the stems here, but the canopy is continuous, shading the rest of that. Then the value is these wet zone rainforests have a lot of endemic plants. I have shown only a few here. Endemic orchid, Gordonia, and what we call Kadupul epiphyllum. Then we are wild relatives of domesticated plant species, like it's a wild relative of Goraka, this one is the normal one, and wild relative of Sadika. So those plants are extremely valuable because those contain genes in the wild relatives. In case the domesticated plants face a difficulty, a disease, or some other destruction, the wild relative genes could come into our help. Then we move on to the highland forest, or called the cloud forest. This is a general view of Horton Plains forest. And the typical appearance is because of the very cold and extremes of weather there and the very strong winds. The branches of these trees in the highlands get twisted, or it's called, technically they are called gnarled appearance. And they are also covered with mosses and lichens. That's typical of the highland cloud forest. And one of the commonest indigenous fauna is Samba, the Gona. And this again is a typical cloud forest tree, rhododendron arboretum, is endemic. From the highlands, these are the watersheds of Sri Lanka. We have beautiful waterfalls giving rise to nice and blue, unpolluted rivers, but they don't remain unpolluted like that, and nice wetlands, of course, then the artificially man-made reservoirs. Those are our wetlands and ponds. I selected a few to show the ecosystem diversity we have. But what do? At least some of us, not everyone. They exploit some of these, our natural habitats. This is a case of logging, exposing the surface soil, and with the heavy rains like what we experience these days, this is what happens, enormous erosion. The topsoil gets completely washed down, and this is what happens to the rivers. Sedimentation, this is the Maha Valley River. I think probably it got its name because Maha Valley, a lot of sand comes down with the rains and sediments on this river. And here is a very nice photo. I was walking across the Gannorua Bridge. I saw the side stream falling into the Maha Valley. You see the side stream is fairly light greenish blue. See the colossal amount of sediments or sand, colloidal sand that is coming in the Maha Valley. You see the clear demarcation here. And most of the salts, now I think if some of you at least have read Dr. Sarath Amarasiri's book on water, clearly he has shown how chemicals like nitrates, phosphates and other chemicals are flowing down from Norelia area along the Mahavalley and goes to all the reservoirs and cause severe pollution there. Most of those salts just don't flow as ions in dissolved form. They are attached to these colloidal particles. So if you can minimize the colloidal flow and sedimentation, we can also reduce pollution. Okay, now let's come to these ecosystems that we saw, the wide diversity of ecosystems of our island, confined to 25,000 square kilometers, is beautiful, so very diverse. But what do they do, the services? I took this example to illustrate. Now, all of us, most of us, normal, healthy human being, apparently consumes about equivalent to 3 oxygen cylinders a day. Now, cost of a refill of oxygen cylinder today is 1,350 rupees. That means in a day we consume 4,015 rupees worth of oxygen a day, every one of us. And that means 1.465 million rupees a year worth of oxygen we consume. And if we live for 65 years or more, now I have gone past that, I have consumed more than 95 million rupees worth of oxygen. But do we ever realize this? We take it for granted. Similarly, there are many other ecosystem services, that those are services provided to all of us by Mother Nature, free, only with love. A rough estimation has been attempted. Way back in 1997, this publication shows other services that nature is providing us, running into billions and billions and billions of dollars. And the total global estimate that was published in 1997, now we are talking here in 2018, 1997, the global ecosystem services have been estimated, nobody can accurately calculate, but estimated to be equivalent to $33 trillion. And surprisingly, it is more than double, nearly double the value of all manufactured and traded goods in the world at that time. Because that came to, I think if I remember right, was something like 17 or 18 trillion dollars. That is everything that is produced by man throughout the globe. But the ecosystems are providing double that, free, although we don't really care. We take it for granted. Unfortunately, if you look at, now we call them the resources. Actually, biodiversity is, when it is utilized, is called bio-wealth or natural resources. But when it comes to global utilization, surprisingly, 20% of the world population from the so-called developed countries, industrialized countries, they use 80% of energy and 85% of the world economy. So it's grossly unequal and unfair, but we can do very little about it. That's the way how the globe has evolved during the last couple of centuries after industrialization. And so they enjoy the major part, we still enjoy a little bit. But what is our aim? Every one of you, including myself, we want to have a comfortable life like the American, the Canadians, Australians, or the Japanese. That's why a lot of Sri Lankans are migrated to those countries. But this next sentence reads very well. It has been told that if everyone wants to enjoy the standard of living of an average US citizen, we would require 4 more planet Earths. If we go on doing this, but of course now there's realization, and that is why we are getting whacked by adverse extreme weather today, not only us, the entire world, because this cannot go on. And a very philosophical statement have been made by Mahatma Gandhi. There are enough resources to satisfy man's needs, but not his greed. If we are satisfied with what we can live average comforts, there are more than enough resources. But no, we can't. I think Lord Buddha has said the same thing. Tanna tamai apita palane karaganna bari. Kochchara labunath madi. Exemplified by our politicians today. I say this without any hesitation. What happens when we overexploit our resources? And already we know environment degradation and habitat loss, production of waste material as a result. If you ever go to a developed country, I think most of you have traveled overseas, you see barges and barges full of waste material being transported. Today, I think you all have experienced that in the Colombo municipality, piling up of waste. Then, of course, on a global scale, global warming, acid rain, and rise in sea level. All these consequences we are experiencing now. Damage to the ozone layer. As a result of that damage, lot of ultraviolet rays, much more than what we used to get, are coming in. And one of the results of too much of UV radiation is the rapid mutations of microorganisms, including viruses. And that is why when our medical personnel find a vaccine or a solution for dengue, another dengue virus comes up very rapidly due to rapid mutations as a result of extra UV radiation as a result of the ozone layer damage. Of course, reduction of biodiversity, and when such natural diversity is destroyed, what comes is are the invasive species. It's the common experience of all people dealing with forests and ecosystems. Now we have experienced extinctions as a result of exploitation of natural resources. These are called recent within quotes because in geological times they are recent, but these also have happened thousands of years ago. In the Mediterranean Sea islands, you don't find a single large mammals. No large mammals, completely gone. West Indies, endemic sloths, monkeys, rodents, and snakes. Of course, they say some of these inhabitants have been even eating them. Madagascar, 24 species of mammals, birds, and tortoises. Hawaii, 66% of all vertebrates and 90% of land birds. Because when Hawaii Islands were invaded by the Asian nations, they have destroyed most of the animals who were there. In New Zealand, certain frogs, lizards, and 30 species of birds. Even in Sri Lanka, there are certain species which have lost. I think the Man and the Biosphere program of Sri Lanka is recording, updating, making red lists, giving threatened species and so on, but still some species are disappearing. In geological times, there had been mass extinctions, that is complete destruction of life on Earth. 5 has already happened. And today, naturalists, environmentalists, and the global climate change scientists are predicting that the 6th mass extinction could be due to man, not anyone else, man, and that is why it is being labeled as an epoch, geological epoch. We are stepping into an epoch, we are moving in the direction of an epoch of Anthropocene. Anthro means dealing with humans, anthropology, Anthropocene. Anthropocene, the epoch of human impact. At the end of the Ice Age, some 12,000 years ago, the ice sheets began receding, withdrawing. And then it led to a warmer climate. And that gave rise to the Holocene. Humans took this opportunity to expand their footprint. They were confined to a little area, but when the warm weather and the ice sheets were withdrawing, they could habitations spread, cities. And what has happened is we have now entered the Anthropocene, or the human impact is so strong, where adverse impacts of human activities have begun to be felt on Earth. Humans have affected the surface of the Earth at a magnitude that ice ages did, but over a much shorter period. It took several thousands of years, but humans are having that impact in a couple of 100 years. That is the thing. That is what Mother Earth may not be able to bear. We know a lot today with all the scientific advances about our footprint, how much impact we are having on Earth. But what we still do not know exactly are the threshold values. What are the values up to which we can exploit? Beyond which, or what are called the tipping points, cannot be crossed, because then you go beyond the point of no return. That we still don't know scientifically accurate. So that is the danger. Now here is a very interesting thing I picked up from one of the volumes of Science Journal, Stephen et al. This graph, which is very interesting, that these are different GDP, population, carbon dioxide concentration, it's too small for me to read, and with various developments, including, I think somewhere it will be as even the McDonald's shops. But what is very interesting and obvious is 1950, this blue line you see here in this curve, 1950 seems to be a turning point here. It is beyond 1950 that everything started going up very, very steeply. So that is where we may have crossed the threshold values sometimes. And if we don't put a stop to this, we are heading for disaster. Now the global scenario, this is one positive aspect, that is at least the human beings have become aware of the danger, except for few people like President Donald Trump. 1992, realizing the dangers of the human impacts, we had the first Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, commonly called the Earth Summit. And here at this conference highlighted the awareness of the impacts of unsustainable use of, because by that time we have gone ahead with unsustainable use, caring nothing for Mother Nature and its natural resources. This awareness was brought into light. And as a result, they said the Earth is warming, global warming, climate is changing, damage to the ozone layer, all these were recognized at that time. That's more than 20 years ago. Then, as a result, we developed a convention on biological diversity. That's to preserve and conserve the biodiversity. It's called CBD. And this was ratified by many countries, including Sri Lanka, but the two major industrial giants, USA and China, refused to sign it for quite a few years. And as I said, President Donald Trump is trying to get out of this now. But they did a review in the same location in Rio de Janeiro 20 years later, that is in 2012. 20 years after 1992, it's called Rio Plus 20 Summit. And they adopted the resolution saying, this is the future humans would like to have, this is the future we want. And that is to move towards sustainable development. The word sustainable was emphasized here. Over the years, people realize it has to be, the development has to be sustainable, otherwise it's going to be a disaster. 3 dimensions were agreed upon: poverty alleviation, sustainable patterns of consumption, not the consumption that the Americans and the Europeans and the Australians, some of them perhaps, were enjoying, not the unequal risk, the sustainable patterns of consumption, and resource utilization that facilitate ecosystem conservation, regeneration, restoration, and resilience in the face of new challenges. Now, even our president today is talking about that. We should restore our forests. We should restore our natural vegetations, which is extremely important, valuable, and should be appreciated by all of us, the scientists, naturalists. The global steps to curb climate change, because climate change has been now accepted. And of course, everyone is experiencing that during the last decade or so. 2013, the International Panel on Climate Change reported, convincingly reported with data, that humans are the causes of climate change more than anyone else. Then, in March 2014, they gave enough evidence to show there's definitely increase in rise in temperature. And September 2014, UN General Secretary's summit meeting secured pledges to cut emissions, which aggravates climate change because it increases particularly carbon dioxide and of course oxides of nitrogen, fluorocarbons and so on and so forth. And end of 2015, there was a final meeting of heads of states in Paris. Even our president signed these legally binding agreements. Now we come to what happened in our country, the Sri Lankan scenario in terms of these global agreements and conventions. 1994, we ratified the CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity, which was agreed upon in 1992. 2 years later, we ratified. We were one of the earliest countries to ratify. 1998-9, the first Biodiversity Conservation Action Plan was published and handed over to the Cabinet. I was fortunate to be a part of writing this because from 1996 we started that exercise together with the IUC in Sri Lanka, and they invited 10 consultants, and I had the good fortune to be the team leader of this team of consultants to draw up the BCAP, as we call it, Biodiversity Conservation Action Plan, the first one. And it came out in 1998-99, and that was the one where we proposed the establishment of a biodiversity secretariat, and that happened. Cabinet accepted it. Today, the biodiversity secretariat is very well managed and doing a wonderful job. They are revising this, and the latest publication, if I remember right, came in 2014, the butterfly flora. Now they are almost finishing, according to the chairman of that subcommittee, one of my good friends, Professor Cyril Vijayasundar, he told me they are now about to finish the one on flora. And they were targeting to finish in 2017, but 2018 they will definitely come out with that publication, which is revising and updating the flora of Sri Lanka, all plant types, and it will come out through the Biodiversity Secretariat. They are preparing, of course, the national red list, classifying plants and animals that are threatened, that are about to go into extinction, and so on and so forth. 2014, the Butterfly Conservation Action Plan. Then I also had this experience when I was introduced. One of my areas of interest have been talked as water pollution. In fact, I did studies on planktons of our reservoirs and freshwater bodies, not rivers, stagnant water, including ponds and large reservoirs, both man-made and irrigation. And we looked at the algal populations there. Now the general rule of the thumb is if a water body is less polluted, its total phytoplankton, the floating photosynthetic microorganisms, floating phytoplankton, will be small, but it's more diverse. That means it will have mainly a lot of diatoms, chlorophyta, and cyanophyta, blue-greens. With increase in pollution, a large number of these, just like the terrestrial plants, cannot withstand the pollution. So many of the sensitive species will start disappearing, and only the tough fellows will be there, and they will then become dominant. And that we find the real tough, dominant phytoplankton that remains, that can withstand pollution, are the cyanobacteria or the blue-green algae, and not only that, they are the toxin-producing cyanobacteria. In fact, certain scientists try to interpret that toxin production is a defense mechanism. When those algae are threatened, they don't produce toxins all the time. When they are threatened with some external factors, then they produce toxins. And that has become a big problem, and is also suspected to contribute to CKDU, chronic kidney disease of uncertain etiology. And I have just, not just, I think it was in 2017, yes, I published this paper, and those who are interested can read this review paper on freshwater toxin-producing, toxigenic freshwater cyanobacteria of Sri Lanka. This publication, more or less, I managed to trace from the early recordings of British limnologists and British naturalists from the time of Professor Frisch, one of the famous British algologists, in the 1800s, right through the 20th century and beginning of 21st century, we clearly see a pattern changing. From harmless algae, we are now, most of the water bodies are dominated by toxin-producing Cylindrospermopsis and Microcystis. This is primarily due to pollution. Wherever there's human habitation and activities, we get these toxin-producing algae dominating. Two exceptions, I think you all are residents of Colombo will be happy to learn this, because Kulasooriya and Labukama reservoirs are free of them. The reason is that the catchment areas of these two reservoirs are protected for us, strictly protected. So if we can think on these lines and start protecting at least some of the other catchment areas which are feeding the rivers and reservoirs, we may be able to minimize this difficulty. So this is, in a way, a negative impact of development. When we establish cities or housing schemes and so on, human habitation, the water gets polluted. As a result, toxin-producing algae becomes dominant. Well, it's time that I conclude. I will conclude by saying development is necessary, but should harmonize with environmental protection and biodiversity conservation. Attention to paid to sustainable development. That's a key word, sustainable development. Sustainable utilization of natural resources. Not to destroy, but to make proper use and keep the resource continuously protected. And conservation of ecosystems. Now we, the human beings, claim that we are the most intelligent, we are the leaders of this living world. We should earn that leadership by being kind, benevolent, and beneficial to the other, what we call less intelligent beings. This is a word from Lord Buddha. Thank you very much.